In the autumn of 1415, a weary English army, outnumbered and half-starved, marched across enemy lands toward an uncertain fate. Their leader, King Henry V, was not merely seeking conquest. He sought legitimacy, power, and divine favor to unite his divided realm. The French, proud and confident in their nobility, saw the English as an invading nuisance soon to be crushed. Yet destiny had chosen a muddy field near Agincourt to write one of history's bloodiest and most unlikely victories. This was not just a battle. It was a storm of arrows, pride and desperation that reshaped medieval warfare forever. It was where kings gambled nations on courage and chaos. The March from Harfleur. After the siege of Harfleur, Henry's army was shattered by disease and exhaustion. Dysentery tore through the ranks, horses collapsed, and soldiers limped through hostile French territory. Supplies dwindled, forcing men to eat stale bread and stolen apples. Yet Henry pressed on, determined to march his army north to Calais, the only English stronghold left on French soil. The French, meanwhile, mobilized thousands of armored knights to intercept him. Along muddy roads and rain-soaked villages, the English stumbled forward, hungry, sick, and hopelessly outnumbered. But Henry's charisma burned through despair. He inspired faith in weary hearts. The march became a test of endurance and loyalty, a pilgrimage of survival through the very heart of enemy France. The French trap tightens. As the English neared the Somme River, the French closed in from all sides. Scouts reported thousands of knights assembling, their banners fluttering like storm clouds. French generals planned to trap Henry before he reached Calais, cutting off his retreat, surrounding him in open terrain. The countryside turned hostile, bridges were destroyed, food stores burned. Henry's men marched longer hours, their boots caked in mud and blood. Morale dipped dangerously low, yet desertion was punished by death. Every step northward was stalked by the thunder of hooves and the arrogance of French nobility. The English army was no longer on campaign. It was being hunted, starved, and cornered like prey. The eve of battle. On the night before battle, the air was thick with rain and dread. Henry's men camped in soaked tents, their bodies trembling with cold. Across the fields, French knights feasted and drank, mocking their pitiful enemies. But within the English camp, prayers whispered through the dark. Henry walked among his soldiers, speaking softly, promising honor, faith, and survival. The French had numbers, the English had purpose. Around flickering fires, archers repaired bowstrings, knights sharpened swords, and priests blessed dying men. It was the calm before history's storm, two nations staring at one another through mist and rain, unaware that dawn would bring one of the most decisive battles of the Middle Ages. St. Crispin's morning dawn broke over Agincourt on October 25th, St. Crispin's Day. The field lay narrow and soaked, bordered by dense woods, perfect for Henry's smaller force. Across the plain, the French glittered in armor, confident in their noble superiority. Trumpets blared, banners rose. Henry ordered his archers forward, hammering wooden stakes into the mud to guard against cavalry. The ground trembled beneath thousands of hooves. As the fog lifted, the English prayed once more, gripping bows and swords with trembling hands. Henry's voice cut through the morning air. "He that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother." The English roared back, and the world held its breath. The first French charge. When the French knights advanced, it was less a charge and more a flood of steel. Horses sank in the mud, their heavy riders struggling to move. The English loosed a storm of arrows, thousands each minute, blackening the sky. Armor cracked, men screamed, horses collapsed under weight and panic. The field became chaos. Those who reached the English lines were cut down by men-at-arms wielding hammers and swords. The narrow terrain trapped the French within their own ranks, choking them in their armor. Arrogance turned to terror, the pride of French nobility drowned in the very mud they had mocked. It was not war, it was slaughter. Mud and blood. The battlefield soon turned into a living grave. Mud clung to every limb, dragging men down to suffocate beneath corpses and armor. The French vanguard broke apart, their knights crushed under their own horses. Blood mingled with rainwater, forming crimson streams. English archers dropped their bows and joined the fight with daggers and mallets, stabbing fallen foes. Henry's command was ruthless, no quarter for prisoners. Even noble blood couldn't buy mercy that day. The French army, suffocating in its own glory, drowned in the very ground it sought to conquer. The mud became their executioner, silent, merciless, eternal. The king in the thick of battle. King Henry fought not from safety, but in the heart of battle. His surcoat was splattered with mud, his sword gleaming through chaos. A French knight struck him hard, shattering part of his helmet, yet Henry stood unbroken. Around him, his men fought fiercely, inspired by his courage. In an age when kings commanded from distance, Henry bled beside common soldiers. His leadership became legend that day, the warrior king who defied odds and led by example. His presence turned fear into fury. To the men of England, Henry was not just a king, he was the embodiment of victory forged in mud and iron. The collapse of French nobility. By midday, the flower of French nobility lay scattered and dying. Dukes, counts, and barons, crushed in heaps, their banners trampled into mud. Pride had led them into disaster. Their armor, once a symbol of glory, became their tomb. English archers stripped corpses for valuables, their faces streaked with sweat and blood. The battlefield echoed with cries of surrender, but Henry feared another attack. He ordered thousands of prisoners executed, a grim decision born from necessity. The French command shattered, their once mighty army reduced to confusion and despair. Agincourt was no longer a battle, it was the burial of an era. The cost of glory, war and wealth victory came at a heavy price. The English, though triumphant, were starving, their wounded crying in agony. Yet the economic spoils were immense. Gold, jewels, and ransoms from captured nobles promised England a brief wealth infusion. Agincourt proved that disciplined strategy could defeat aristocratic arrogance. War became commerce, victory measured in ransom and loot. Henry's triumph sent shockwaves through Europe's feudal economies, where noble blood no longer guaranteed dominance. English archers, once mere peasants, returned home as heroes and symbols of rising common power. The war had redrawn not only borders, but the economics of valor itself. Politics of a crowned legend Agincourt transformed Henry V from warrior to legend. His victory solidified his claim over France, forcing treaties and royal marriages that reshaped European politics. The French monarchy, humiliated, faced internal rebellion and economic ruin. English propaganda glorified Henry as God's chosen ruler, the perfect Christian king. Yet behind the triumph lay exhaustion and grief. Thousands of peasants had died for royal ambition. Still, in England, Henry's name became immortal, a monarch who defied fate and rewrote history. The victory at Agincourt was more than war. It was the making of a myth, where a single battle crowned a man as both conqueror and savior. The Field of the Dead. As the battle's smoke cleared, the field of Agincourt resembled a vast graveyard. Corpses carpeted the mud, men, horses, and armor fused together by rain and death. The cries of the dying echoed for hours, unanswered. English soldiers moved among the fallen, cutting throats of the wounded to end their misery. The stench of blood and rot filled the air. For the French nobility, it was annihilation. Whole lineages vanished in one morning's slaughter. Henry ordered prayers for the dead, friend and foe alike. Yet beneath his solemn tone, he knew this carnage had secured his place among history's immortals. The field was silent now, but it had spoken louder than any crown. Counting the cost. When the sun rose higher, the English began counting, not just their dead, but their spoils. Over 6,000 French nobles were slain, while fewer than 500 English lay fallen. Ransomable prisoners were stripped of gold rings and jeweled swords. The English war chest overflowed, yet the human cost was immeasurable. Many survivors carried lifelong wounds and sickness from the campaign. Henry's victory was both divine and dreadful. A triumph built upon suffering. In France, entire estates crumbled as noble heirs lay dead. In England, merchants and guilds celebrated. Trade routes through the Channel would soon reopen under English control. The balance of wealth, once French-dominated, began to tilt toward London's emerging power. The return to Calais. The march to Calais was grim but glorious. Henry led his weary army through devastated villages where French peasants stared in silence. They carried banners of triumph, yet the men beneath them limped, bleeding and starved. In Calais, bells rang and fires burned in celebration. Traders gathered at the port, offering supplies and transport in exchange for captured loot. English merchants saw opportunity in victory, new contracts, new taxes, and the promise of wealth from conquered lands. Henry rewarded his soldiers with coin and honor, ensuring loyalty for campaigns ahead. The war had enriched England not through conquest of land alone, but through the commerce of courage and blood. The economics of war. Agincourt changed the nature of wealth in medieval Europe. No longer was gold earned only by birth. It was taken by skill and courage. English archers, once commoners, returned home with French jewelry, armor, and horses. The value of skilled soldiers rose, while noble ransom became a thriving business. London's trade guilds invested in weapons and war loans, strengthening the monarchy's treasury. France, meanwhile, faced economic ruin. Fields lay unharvested, taxes soared, and merchants fled to safer towns. The English crown's wealth was built not only on land, but on the currency of victory itself, a reminder that war could be both devastation and industry. The diplomacy of power. In the aftermath, Henry's victory became his greatest political weapon. He demanded the French throne through diplomacy, forcing negotiations that humiliated his rivals. The French monarchy, divided and weakened, had little choice. By 1420, through the Treaty of Troyes, Henry was recognized as heir to France and married Princess Catherine, binding two crowns in uneasy peace. Yet beneath the alliance lay bitterness and resentment. France's economy bled from war taxes, and its peasants starved while nobles hid in ruined castles. Henry's triumph was not just a military feat, it was a chess move in European politics, turning battlefield carnage into royal legitimacy and continental dominance. The legacy of the longbow Agincourt proved that skill and strategy could defeat nobility. The English longbow, cheap and deadly, redefined warfare. It shattered the age of knights in armor, replacing chivalry with discipline and range. Archers from villages and farms became the new power on the battlefield. Their success inspired armies across Europe to reform, shifting resources from heavy cavalry to trained infantry. The economic implications were immense. Less reliance on expensive knights meant more efficient militarization. Commoners gained pride, wages, and voice in royal service. The longbow was not just a weapon, it was an equalizer that reshaped both war and society. France in ruins. For France, Agincourt was disaster beyond measure. Whole generations of noble families perished, leaving estates leaderless and bankrupt. Trade collapsed, merchants feared English raids, and peasants deserted farms. Inflation soared as coinage devalued to fund the shattered army. French kings struggled to collect taxes from a land in rebellion. Bandits roamed the countryside, and famine swept through villages. Agincourt had broken not only France's army, but its economy and spirit. In the taverns of Paris, poets lamented the day pride drowned in mud. It would take decades for France to recover from the humiliation of one October morning that turned its glory into ashes. England's golden moment. In England, Agincourt brought a brief age of prosperity. The crown's coffers swelled from ransoms and new trade deals. Guilds produced arms for export, while ports like London and Bristol flourished. Peasants saw rare social mobility. Archers elevated to respected status. Knights rewarded with lands. The victory inspired art, literature, and theater, feeding the legend of an invincible nation favored by God. Yet this wealth came at the cost of endless war. Taxes rose, and future generations would inherit the burden. Agincourt's gold glittered bright, but its shine hid the price of empire, one paid in blood and time. The death of a king. Years later, Henry V would die young, far from the fields of Agincourt. His dream of uniting England and France faded as disease and rebellion consumed both realms. Yet his legend endured, the warrior king who turned desperation into glory. His soldiers remembered his courage, his enemies, his mercy and ruthlessness. Agincourt had given him immortality, but not peace. History would recall his name not for his crown, but for his valor in the mud. Even as kingdoms crumbled, Henry remained the symbol of destiny forged by will. His sword, his faith, and his words, "We few, we happy few," became eternal echoes of leadership. The immortal echo of Agincourt. Centuries later, Agincourt still stands as a monument to human endurance and fate. It redefined warfare, humbled nobility, and exalted common men. Beyond blood and banners, it was the story of how courage defied calculation. Economies rose and fell, monarchs lived and died, but Agincourt remained the lesson. That strategy and unity conquer arrogance. Every generation finds new meaning in that muddy field. The endurance of the human spirit amid chaos. For King Henry and his men, it was not just victory, it was immortality earned in rain, mud, and glory. Agincourt was where history bowed to courage, and never stood the same again.